Wait, before you say that, he should be familiar. Sister Fanny, have you heard this before? Sister Keys, have you heard this before? Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah. It perhaps is ringing a bell. I know for us, because we were trained in this way, but leadership, John Maxwell describes as simply influence. It's really simple. It's just influence. It's influencing anything or anyone. And so if leadership means influence, the reality is everybody influences. Everybody influences. You influence the garden you garden. You influence the people at your job. You have influence. And that means that you are a leader. Now, as a child of God, you have a responsibility to influence people toward Christ. It could be in the way you communicate. It could be in your acts of service, your kindness. All of that is influence, which means all of that is leadership. So you are a leader by default of being a Christian. So the Christian doesn't ask the question, am I a leader? The Christian asks, what kind of leader am I? So you are either leading positively or negatively, but you are leading.
Trying to pull up my phone so I can see my list of questions here, but I think that's important because at Hovey Street, our vision is built on 4 pillars. They're built on 4 pillars. What are those things? What are those 4 pillars? Because remember, our vision is to intentionally build a village of hope that helps and heals families. But it only can help and heal families through utilizing those 4 pillars, those 4 things that hold us up together. And what are those 4 things? See, there's an order for them because there's a way. CJ ain't saying nothing. You notice that? You act like he got his headphones on. He ain't saying nothing. Just everybody in here should. Now, this is the year of vision, and we've been quoting the vision every Sunday. So there's discipleship. You cannot be a great church if you're not a disciple. Discipleship builds great fellowship because nobody wants to be a part of a cantankerous, miserable church that doesn't love to be around each other. That's why fellowship is key. And then leadership is key because of what was just said. Everybody in this congregation has the capacity to be a leader. And we have to teach that, and we have to build that, and we have to showcase that, where everybody has responsibility to lead. From your family, to the garden that you influence, to the group, utilizing our leadership. And we say that because chocolate people have been told to follow so long that they've forgotten how to lead. But here's what's key. In order to be a good leader, you have to be a great follower. So leadership, and then the last one is what? Partnership, because we can't do this alone. That's why we have Cleveland Consulting. Amen. So your challenge for churches as you examine the post-pandemic era, we've been through a global pandemic. Your challenge or your thoughts on church in this century, in this time now. What are your thoughts on church in this time right now?
I think that the pandemic created a different way for us to measure our success as the church. For a long time, church has been measured by its success is measured by a few things. One, how many people are in the seats. So it's a population argument. our church is successful because we've got a lot of people. 2, programs. How many programs do we have? How many things do we have that are affecting people, connecting the people? And then 3, our bank account. How much money do we have in our bank account? And churches for a long time measured their success on those 3 things. As long as we got a lot of people, as long as we got a lot of programs, and as long as we got cash, then we doing good. And when we went to the pandemic, we found out none of that mattered. Nobody was in the pew. Okay? If you had money, what were you going to do with it? And you couldn't operate any programs. So then what? And what's interesting is that church in America had used those 3 pillars for success for so long, we didn't know how to be successful without those 3. The interesting thing is, not having those 3 really puts you back in the first century context. No programs. Okay. It wasn't built on how many people you have. Okay. And the church, sure enough, didn't have much cash. And yet, it was growing. So we have built church in such a convenient fashion to create comfort for our constituents that we realize now that we're actually trying to figure out, well, how do we work with just the gospel? If all we've got is the gospel, what do we do with that? So I'm saying all that to say there's a redefinition of success. Can you remain consistent in your conviction to God if there's not a lot of people in the room? If we don't have a ton of programs, can you still get excited? You know, if we don't have a bunch of money, can you still be committed? You know, so God, I think, removed all of those measurements so that we could just focus on Him and hopefully stay there and build everything from that place. So I think that so to answer more specifically, to me the biggest challenge is, it's almost like the book of Hebrews. Hebrews is designed to try to convince Jewish Christians to stay with Christ instead of going back to Judaism. And I almost feel like right now what we're trying to do with this move that God has made with the pandemic is to convince people not to go back to measuring our success the way we used to, but to convince them to continue to go forward, that God gave us the gift of the pandemic. And don't get me wrong, it killed and took the lives of many beautiful people that we miss. But sometimes God does His best work through pain. And so hopefully we will see what God has removed and keep moving forward toward that end instead of trying to go back and create success based upon things that were pre-pandemic. Because now we have a group of people that are really interested in the gospel.
I think that's profound in itself. As you were talking about that, you know, I thought about here, I pushed us to be crazy enough that in the midst of a pandemic, we decided to try to get, you know, a 40,000 square foot facility.
Why not?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
I mean, why not go out there?
Yeah.
And one of the things I think is probably going to be seen historically when there's a view back on what we've done here is that in the midst of a global pandemic, God showed His favor on us and poured into our possession 6.9 acres of land, a 40,000 square foot facility to do ministry different.
Yeah.
To do ministry different because there is a need to do ministry different.
Yeah.
Coming out of a global pandemic. So as we try to erase those 3 things and, you know, not necessarily erase them, but not use them as the measuring stick, right? Not use them as the measuring stick to ministry. Do you, I mean, because you do a lot of traveling, a lot of consulting, a lot of work, man, while you're traveling, do you see any innovation? And if you see any innovation, can you highlight some of that for us that you've seen in your travels and your journey? You know, especially south and especially out west, because most times stuff that happens out west moves this way, and then we start to catch on to that. Do you see any innovation that we should be looking for in the years to come that you can think of? Or any ideas that you could think of?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one of the things that, as I look in the back of the room and I see that camera back there against the wall, I remember watching you all pre-pandemic and then watching you now. And there are some features that you have that you didn't have then. The service was definitely recorded online, but it has become more aesthetically pleasing. It has become more intentional. I see the
Aesthetically, you said we
aesthetically,
look good.
You look better.
We look better.
You look better.
Yeah.
You look better. When I'm looking at a distance, I'm seeing the logo back here and the lighting here, and all of that says that you were intentional about trying to keep people connected in a time where it was hard to be connected. If you had the conversation about this stuff pre-pandemic, may have been a few dissenters. It could have been a civil war. Whenever you do anything new or different, the people who struggle with change always see it as a challenge to their preference or ego. I was a part of the conversations when y'all went with the chairs. And I remember years ago preaching, and we say, we want to use our edifice for multi-purpose. And it's hard to do when you have pews. Pews lock your room. You can only do what you can do because you can't move those. But when you have chairs, you can make your room do 10, 15, 20 things. But there were people that their identity was so wrapped up in pews that they couldn't even imagine what the church would be like without a pew. When pews are really only about 200 to 300 years old in church history. So, as our preacher would often say, normal is what you're used to. So when you say, that ain't normal, well, it's because that's not what you're used to. But God never had a word on pews. You understand? We don't have the time to walk through church history, but just know, even the sermon wasn't the primary aspect of Christian worship until about maybe 300 years ago. Communion actually was. And so the room was set up like communion was the most important part of worship. And communion was a big fellowship piece. And then when oration in this would be the 17th century, became more profound, and we found German criticism and all that stuff, 1700s, 1800s, then the preaching moment became the bigger point of emphasis, so the room fit the bigger emphasis. So where's the preacher stand? Right here, and everybody else over here. So there's never been this is the way it's supposed to go. I'm saying all that to say the pandemic opened doors for conversations you might normally not have had. And so I'm saying that to say the technology has been, to me, one of the biggest change that I've seen in church, the biggest innovation. And churches who have embraced technology have found ways to stay more connected. The churches that have decided, that's just not our thing, we're not interested, but none of your people were connected for 2 years either.
Yeah, I know for me, it was my struggle was because as wide world of internet, I don't preach to everybody. So it's like trying to turn that on. Now you got everybody watching. I'm like, because I always believe that preaching is preaching to the people that's in front of you. It's like I serve them, and having to make that adjustment that, them are online.
Yeah, it's a wider net.
Yeah, it's a wider net, and so that has been adjusting, and I think we're working, and like you said, we'll continue to make steps to be more innovative in our technology and all of those things, and now we have a very expensive camera. It's very expensive. Partnership has its things.
It does. I think the reality of that is that technology allows us to cast a wider net.
Yes.
There are people now that are most likely going to tune in and watch you before they step in the building.
Right.
And I think, we were talking about this the other day, that as we change, even in churches of Christ, people are in the edifice of other faith groups more because of technology than they were before. And so some of our stigmas and prejudices about different religious groups have changed because we can actually see what they're doing. For a long time we operated in our silos. We would use they. We don't do this because they, and really we were assuming. And now that we're able to get online, we look around and we go, well, I see 10 things I actually do at my church.
Or would like to do.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. So it just creates more, puts a little bit more pressure on us to be more imaginative and more creative instead of doing church as status quo.
Wow, and that's challenging. I remember we talk all the time, so I remember one year at another congregation when I was in Muncie, we moved the chairs before the revival.
Yeah.
We moved the chairs in the front, and people did not invite people to the revival because they were upset about the moving of the chairs.
Yeah.
Because those chairs represented so much more to them than it did to me. It was just the moving of the chairs to create the space to move out. We want a lot of people coming in.
Right.
But to them, those chairs, matter of fact, the sister said, we purchased those chairs in 1976 when we moved into this building. And these chairs have chairs out in the foyer. Yeah, these chairs have always been here, and they should never have been moved.
Mm-hmm.
And it was simply moving the chairs from one part of the building to the other part of the building.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so insulting to the people that they refused to invite people to worship, to the gospel meeting. They were upset about that. And so I've learned that, even in innovation, and making change, people will be in
Yeah, I agree. I think we would do better as a church. We would do better as a church if we were more honest with our feelings. I think we have and I know in the South we experience this a lot, passive-aggressive behavior.
Yes.
Where, if you said something to me I don't like, instead of me being honest, say, hey, bro, I ain't appreciate that.
Right.
I'll start acting funny.
Right.
I'll beat around the bush.
Right.
I'll be short.
Yeah.
And then he's asking me, what's wrong? And I'm cool. I'm being passive aggressive.
Yeah.
I'm passively venting my frustration. When honestly I could just say, hey, I didn't like that, and we could deal with that issue. I think one of the problems in church is that we are not honest enough to communicate and articulate why we feel the way we feel about what's happening.
Right.
And then we sit and we brood in our emotions for 8-9 months, 2 years, and then they ask you to be on the ministry. I don't want to do nothing around here. Really, because you mad about chairs. Now let's just be honest. It'd been helpful if you would have said, I have an emotional connection to these chairs. The reason why is because ever since I was a child, this always was something that was connected to my identity as a member of this church. Right. I'm not saying you can't move them. I'm just saying I'm having a hard time emotionally dealing with that. Can y'all imagine how much further along we would be if people could articulate that? Because then, as the preacher, I can say, I hear you and I appreciate you telling me that, and I'm sorry that you feel that way. Here is what's behind me making this change. Here's what I'm trying to do.
It's not just to piss you off.
Absolutely. Every suggestion, and our preacher used to tell us this all the time, don't let your position and your ego get too close together.
Hold on, when you say that, watch this. Cornez, what law of leadership is that? Doc Quavers, what law of leadership is that? You got to say it loud now. Don't let your ego get so close to your position that when your position falls, your ego goes with it. And most people do exactly that.
Yep.
Allow their position to determine who they are and what they're going to be, and so their ego is so connected to that position. And a lot of them are not official positions.
Right.
They're not official positions.
Right.
Just everybody know I run this.
It could literally mean your position could be a member of the Hovey Street Church of Christ.
Yeah.
Position.
Yeah.
All right. So then, if your ego is too connected, then when somebody asks a question, you'll communicate from a place of ego when really, hey, as a member of the church, I need to be able to have my position. I need to have a view as a member of this congregation, and then I can also have a personal view. But you need to know from which view you're communicating from, or you're going to confuse others and you're going to confuse yourself. I know how to say, look, as a preacher, this is how I feel about this. Okay, personally, for my ego, this don't bother me at all. But if you don't understand there is a difference, then you'll be communicating personally and saying it's positional. You'll be saying like, I just don't think this is the right move. Be honest. You're not speaking as the member of the church or the person that's over this ministry. You're sharing your personal feelings and masking it as, I believe this is good for the church. No, just say honestly, I don't like white paint.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's okay. That doesn't mean that stuff still won't change, but it means that we at least know, and we can put it in its proper category as we consider making these changes. But you won't make everybody happy.
Definitely can't do that. As you say that, and leaders, and I guess part of the challenge in church is different in business and government, because most of the time it's more democracy, and so the more you can rally people with you, the larger your rallying group is, then you feel like you have the more say so. When, so in leadership, can you talk about a little bit more about the idea of kingdom, of theocracy? Because I think sometimes when you function in theocracy, people who only understand democracy almost feel like the preacher is functioning in totalitarianism. So theocracy, can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah. So one of the fundamental distinctions of theocracy versus democracy is democracy, of course, is for the people. And so any democracy is built on the wishes of the people. Technically, right now, if we wanted to make a change nationwide to give everybody an AR-15, if that's what we want to do, as a country, we could do that. Because it's a democracy, it's for the people. The people's voice is the authority. Okay? Now that was put in place, and I think this is interesting to say. That was put in place because America, previous to being America, was an appendage of the British nation, as well as the French and the Spanish. And so, because we did not want there to be, rule in terms of kings and queens, we end up having what we call the American Revolution. So we fought Britain so that we could have our own stuff. And the way they built this country was completely antithetical to the way the other countries were developed, because they didn't ever want to be in a situation where they were dictated to, which is a dictatorship, right? And so when the church was established in America, it carried with it some of those democratic views that what we do, we love God, but we really want to do what we want to do. That's a problem in church, because a theocracy is really a group governed by God. A kingdom is, there are three components to a kingdom. There's got to be a king, there's got to be a place that the king rules, and then there's got to be people that are being ruled. Okay? All of that exists in God's kingdom. The trouble we have with that is we don't always really understand what the king is saying, and we don't know the distinction between what the king is saying versus what our tradition has said. You understand? So you will then make the tradition what the king says. So if you've been going to church your whole life at 10:30 every Sunday morning, and the preacher say, we're going to have church at 11:30. then you start fighting that because you're like, that ain't how the church supposed to go. Whose voice determined that? Was it the king or was it the tradition? Well, come to find out, the king ain't said nothing about what time we come to church. He hadn't said a word. All we've got is the Lord's day, right? So that means the tradition is the king of the other voice, right? So if you're going to fight, at least fight with understanding what you're fighting against. Are you fighting against the theocracy or the tradition? And so I think we battle with that sometimes, and when we don't know the king's voice, then we use other voices to give us information that the king is not really saying. And so when we have a commitment to theocracy, then we step back a little bit and say, okay, let's start with what the king said, and then we'll move on down from there. I think if we do that, we'll have a lot better practices in terms of how we do church.
Here, and I'm going to ask, let you guys, if you have any questions, want you to be prepared to ask those questions, you know. Not questions like where you get your shoes from, you know. But questions.
I wouldn't know that either.
He would point to me at that point. Where'd you get these from? but I want you to consider your questions. But I want to talk about the idea of partnership and the balance that you see happening inside Churches of Christ, because we know for a long time other faith groups had no problem with partnerships, but we were more exclusive and almost denounced partnering. Do you see that? Because I know, of course, where you worship at, there's a lot of partnership that takes place. But do you see that in other places? Are you seeing that sort of partnering with different organizations and things like that? Do you see that happening in the church? And if it is or if it's not, what's your take on partnership?
Yeah. I think partnership has been tough for us in Churches of Christ for so long because we built, our part of our branding was exclusivity, meaning it's our thing and this is what we do, the true church, and we created this exclusivity that almost began to look like uniformity. So one of the things we used to say back in the 30s and 40s is that it doesn't matter which Church of Christ you go to. If you go to one out west, you go to one out east, one up north, one down south, we all do the same thing. And we erroneously use those passages like in 1 Corinthians 1 where he says, 1:10 I think, he says, I want you all to speak the same thing and be in one accord. And of course, what Paul was actually doing was responding to a direct, specific issue that he heard about. And he said, hey, on this thing, I want y'all to be of the same mind. Well, what was that thing? Some are of Apollos. Right. Some are of Paul. Paul said, I planted. Right? Apollos watered. But God gave the increase. He was responding to that. Not everybody has to be doing the same thing because y'all, it's not possible. It's Lord have mercy. The gospel is the unmitigated subject. It can't be changed. You can't change. Jesus came, died, was buried, rose from the grave on the third day. He is the Savior for all mankind. We can't change that. But in terms of how we operate, how we sing, how we maneuver, how we communicate, from a principle standpoint, it's connected to the gospel. But from the specifics, we're all different. The culture in the South is different than the culture up north. God was not expecting us to sing the exact same songs and have the exact same order of worship. He's not calling us to uniformity. He's calling us to unity. And God himself is unity. The Father is not the Son. The Son is not the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is not the Father. They are one in essence, but they have different functions. They're diverse. So they're one God, but they have different functions. So they're diverse. So how is it that the Godhead is diverse, but the church can't be? How is the Godhead diverse, but the church has to be uniform? Right? So this is sort of where we went. If another group was not uniform, didn't start church at the same time, didn't dress the same time, didn't sing the same way, if they weren't uniform, we considered them out of fellowship. They're not a part of us. Okay, well, if y'all in this building, there's no gym in this building. Okay, but there might be a gym across the street. Okay, well, back in the day, we wouldn't partner with the folks that own the gym across the street because they don't believe in all of our ideals. So we would go, no, we can't do that because that's walking in darkness. Right? And so other faith groups were tapping into those resources, and because we didn't agree with that because we are exclusive, we threw mud on them too. We look at them, partnering with them. And then what we came to find out later on is that if I'm waiting on another group to partner with that agrees with everything I agree from top down, then I'm never going to partner with anybody. I can't even really partner with the folk in the congregation because we ain't on the same page about everything. You follow what I'm saying? And then how far do you really want this to go? Who's the power company here? I can't remember.
AES now.
AES. It used to be IPL. That's what I remember, right? You had to partner with IPL or AES to get lights in here. How far do you really want to go with that? Well, you know, they not Christians, and we don't know nothing about their theology. We don't know their view about denominationalism and the post-apocalyptic times, and we don't know their theology on Sunday worship versus Sabbath and all that. You didn't care because you needed lights. And so I think what we started realizing is it looks real silly when we expect to line up with every belief, with everybody. Now, there's one thing if a group postures themselves in a way that's completely antithetical to all things God. We wouldn't want us partnering with a satanist group. Okay? Because in their moral compass, in the very fiber of their view on society and people, they don't see anything good about things that are good. That's an issue. But I started with, look, do you believe in Jesus? Yes? Well, let's work together. And if you don't, and I need a resource that you have, even beyond the resource, I'm thinking about how can I bring Jesus to you? Some partnerships I've had in the past so that I could evangelize. I knew them folk didn't care nothing about the church, didn't care about nothing about doing good thing, but they had a resource and they wanted to sell it. So I'm thinking, well, maybe this is my opportunity to evangelize. So I think partnership is important because you can't do anything by yourself. You need help. But we need to be responsible in understanding that if we draw those lines, then go ahead and be consistent then. If you really want to be, they need to believe in everything I believe, then take that all the way down. Somebody need to be outside on one of them manual bicycles and pumping electricity into the building. That would be silly.
Right.
Okay, but we just got to be honest, I think, about that.
I remember one of a very proud moment for me in the life of this congregation is our partnership with the only black credit union in the city of Indianapolis. And I remember one year we were having a meeting and I was talking to the preachers and I said, we all need to take 10% of our offering and put a savings account in this black credit union to, build up the credit union. And the preacher said to me, "No, they Baptist." And I fell out laughing because I said, "You don't even know who owns Chase. Like, you don't even know who runs PNC. Like,
right.
But you still put your money there."
Right.
But it's hard, especially for black folk, to really do partnership because we've been taught not to trust each other.
Right.
And they've got to be trying to get something from me. So I do agree with you. We can't, agree on everything, but power partnership. So one of my, we are a field member of that credit union, and I'm very proud. That's why we put the plaque on the wall. And then, I did get some pushback from some preachers, but at the same time, they'll be all right. So, any thoughts, any questions for the preacher as we have them in this moment? And again, he's more than just a preacher. He is a business consultant. Yes.
Good morning.
When we talk about emotional attachment to chairs, right? I've been in many churches around the world, but they feel it. You understand what I'm saying? So this is what I got to say. If I am kin to people that were in the foundation of people in the church, it's okay. Right? Not just me, I'm just saying broadly. I'm just saying in the family.
Okay.
It is okay. If one of my relatives, one of your relatives are in the church, then you go, right? But for the outcast, for what I've experienced and seen, for the lost sheep in the world that lead us and try to come in and learn us, we can catch the fish, but we can't eat. And it's not always their brokenness, it's our brokenness, right? Because we're so emotionally attached, like you said, it's a word you use, I can't remember, but I know wrong.
Okay.
Because we are so emotionally attached to, and it doesn't matter the denomination everywhere, no matter what, because we're emotionally attached to God, the foundation, this church, the fellowship, what we've been through, what we're doing, that, our mind is on. And it is so disheartening to see, because I felt over a long time, regardless of where I come from, and it's so hard to watch the same hurt when somebody's sitting next to me, that the church is opened up and they can feel them out, but they can feel they're not really
That's
accepted or want Christ. They don't come back, or they try it.
Right.
Keep coming back, looking for the unity, but they're not really because they wasn't here, or they didn't,
they're not as connected.
yeah.
So that's a profound statement. What would your question be? Would you want him to sort of give insight to?
What I'm saying, what I'm asking is, how I, as a person, right, get the lost, some of the lost sheep that I supervise, that I'm over, how do I connect with them to get them to even come to the service, come to the church, because I'm happy, but it doesn't matter how I'm a true believer. It doesn't matter how the worship goes, or how rituals go in the church. Once I get in the middle of the conversation with the Holy Spirit, God's right there.
So how do you get them to?
I just need a better, I don't know, I just need to get some of them in to see, or at least feel something different than outcast.
Absolutely, that's a good question.
So, interesting thing, I attend church, my wife and I, we attend church in Atlanta, but we live in Montgomery, Alabama. So we travel about 2 hours every weekend to go to worship. At my job, a number of things I do, but one of them is I direct a department in the housing authority. And so I have 4 employees that I'm responsible for overseeing. In the period of time that I started until now, which is January, and we're now getting ready to be in June, so about 5 or 6 months, we've developed a very close relationship to the extent where we've had deep conversations about life, about God. We've even had Bible studies, and yet they aren't members of the church that I attend. And in the past, I would have only had this kind of connection with them because they came to church. But I have that kind of connection with them outside of church. My point is that there's a level of authenticity that they've gotten from me that makes them so trusting of me and committed to me and connected to me that if they came to church with me, they would feel included because they're included with me.
Right. That's
And I think that to change a culture, it requires one person at a time. Like I might not be able to come in here and turn the chairs from blue to red, but I can change myself, and then that person connects to me, and all of a sudden their perception even of the room will change the more they see change in me. And I think a part of it is that we've given the responsibility of environment, say to the preacher and to those that have official capacities, that we've forgotten like our personal role in it. Actually, in terms of that, the preacher can do very little in terms of the connection between you and the people you have influence over. So for me, I would say I would evaluate if whatever it is that God has done to you and with you, I would evaluate if they can see that as much as they should. Is there some more you can open up to them? Are there some doors that you could let them in where they could see these are some areas of my life that I was really concerned about, that I really struggled in, that I'm jacked up in actually right now, and I'm not as bad as I could be because God, what?
Right.
And in that way, I think they'll see, wow, God did that for you. Like, I'm very open about my story and some of the things I've been through and what God has done with me. And so where I could take them to the grocery store. They're going to feel included in that grocery store because I'm in it.
Right. Right.
Yep.
Right. Well,
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
all right,
ma'am.
we're going to get ready. I got to get Jason, and then we got to, because he still got to preach. You don't get out of that part. We got to get that part too. No, go ahead, Jason. What's your question? Yes, sir.
Bless you.
Service the people because our purpose is to be for the people, and also in the Bible has said something about speaking the language of the people, and how you talk about one of those things recently was like to adapt with technology, so we was able to reach people even when the people were not in this physical body, we still be in the church. So within all of that, and breaking away from tradition and still trying to uphold that purpose, because we are for the people, and we know that the people that we speak about is our future, our children. So we're being protective of our children, and then knowing that the enemy has a devised plan to kill our children. How do we break away from tradition and what people are so used to seeing and still have like a more readiness instead of like even with the way we fellowship? Because like I hear like even when we tossing around back and forth ideas, we still talking about people being upset because the changes inside the building.
Right.
What about what's really going on the overall spectrum? When do we, really, because it's a war going on, so
Right.
when do we start talking about preparedness?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's good. That's good. I believe that and I'm going to go back to what I said earlier, I believe our lack of honesty has caused us to create lines and build walls where God didn't. And those walls become barriers for us to do the effective ministry that God actually calls us to. Like if you actually read 1 Corinthians in an easy to read Bible, just read it through, you're going to find Paul addressing issue after issue after issue after issue. People eating certain meats, people worshiping a certain way, people abusing communion, people suing each other, people divorcing for the wrong reasons, all kind of issues. But when he gets to chapter 15, he says, but let me tell you what's first and most important. Jesus died. Jesus rose from the grave. He was seen by 500 witnesses, including Peter and the apostles, and he's coming back again. Now, that's where we start. That's where we start. But if we start at the paint and the lights and our traditions, then we're going to have a problem with doing real ministry. I think you got to, number one, the church, everybody in the body. I remember doing this, and I know our time is running out, but I remember one of the last series that I taught at the previous congregation where I served is, what is the gospel? And I had everybody write it down, like as long or short as you want it, and just give it to me. And when I read it, I mourned. because I recognize a lot of us don't know how to articulate just what is the gospel, just what is it. Like if you had to talk to somebody who's never heard of the Bible, church, God, nothing, could you explain the gospel? But we can explain church.
Right.
We know churchology.
Right.
You wanna ask about 1987 Indianapolis Church of Christ? We know all of that, but we know very little about Jesus and the gospel, which is why it's so hard for us to talk about saving people's souls, preparing young people for battle and for warfare. We don't know how to do it because we don't know Jesus, right? So I'm saying all that to say that when we don't know the gospel, we don't really know how to program for those things that you're talking about. So I think we need to get people to, number one, what is the gospel? Okay. Number two, if the gospel is first, what's second? And if we're honest in that conversation, carpet and chairs ain't nowhere near second. Right? If you can articulate and understand that, then we can have a real conversation about what we're going to do about these young boys.
Absolutely.
Because your communication will start from Jesus died.
Right.
Jesus was buried. Jesus rose on the third day. Because of that power we now have from that decision, then we can talk about how to save these young boys. But we can't have that conversation if all I know is church.
Right.
Because then I'm going to be saying, well, how do we build this program? How does it fit with the church? What? How does it fit with the gospel?
And then and if you take that approach, you can give a guy who just got out of prison Jesus and the disinherited.
There you go.
That's only funny to me and him because y'all don't know what Jesus and the disinherited is. But to your point, we can reach outside our walls when we're ready to start talking about the real spiritual warfare that our children are under. Again, we appreciate you, Doc. Appreciate you very much. Yeah. Amen. Y'all give him a hand. Amen.
Appreciate it.
For answering those questions. I know we ran long, and usually when Brother Avery is teaching class, it's about this time that I'm fire